Hey, sports card fans, it's John Wade Boggs fan. Hope you're all doing well. When I put my 100 cards for $10,000 list together, my ultimate goal was, of course, to eventually acquire all 100 cards. But my secondary goal was to spend the least amount of money acquiring those 100 cards and still pick up cards that had really nice eye appeal. Because when I put that list together, I didn't have $10,000 sitting aside ready to spend on cards. I have a very limited hobby budget, so any of the cards that I acquire off of that list, I have to have the current funds available to pick up some of those cards. So every time I would look for a card, I want to try to spend the least amount of money because that stretches my hobby dollars and will allow me to eventually get all 100 cards. And for the 40 cards that I've picked up so far, every single one of them, I have spent less than what I had listed on my 100 card list. Now, in a couple cases, it's because I found a really nice deal on a card in the grade that I had put it on my list for. But most of the time, it's because I dropped down a number grade or even two to save money. Well, for card number 41, this is the first time that I spent more than I thought I would need to spend on a card. Now, I anticipated this. There are certain cards on my list, some of the higher end cards, that based on the grade I assigned and the price that I would have to spend, I figured that for some of them I would need to spend probably that full amount, or in some cases maybe a little bit more, even if I drop down a grade. But some of them are in a grade that I don't really want to drop any lower because then it would really be hard to find a card with nice eye appeal. You're starting to get into grades where there could be some creases, some noticeable creases on the card, not necessarily the corner issues. Centering is going to be a problem. So I knew at some point I would have to spend either what I had the card listed for or more. Well, for card 41, not only did I spend more than I thought I would have to spend, I spent 60% more on this card than I thought I would have to spend. But I am so happy that I picked up this card. It is so well worth the money that I had spent. Once I get into the numbers, you actually see that what I spent on the card is actually a pretty good deal for the grade that I got the card in. Now, this was a card that I had been looking for actually since the National. And again, I'm going to get a little bit more into it when I go over the numbers. But a couple of weeks ago, I saw a picture. Someone posted something on X that they saw this listing for this particular card on eBay. And as soon as I saw the picture of it, I knew that I wanted to go after it. It was an auction. And just based on the card's image on the listing, I fell in love with it. And then when I got the card in hand, I loved it even more. There are certain cards that I'm sure that are in your collection that you just absolutely love for whatever reason, and maybe you can't even come up with a reason. Like you just see the card and there's something about it that you just love. This is a card that I have wanted for a very long time. Basically, once I started building my vintage collection a little over 4 years ago, this was a card that I've always loved, and I am so happy to have this card in my collection. It's not a super high-end card. It's not a cheap card either, but one that's fairly affordable, especially in the grade that I got. So, I didn't spend a ton of money, relatively speaking, but it's one that I knew I couldn't just pick up whenever I wanted to. I had to have enough funds available, and I am so glad that I put in an aggressive bid. And again, I'll go over the numbers, let you know what I won the card for and how much I paid for it and all that stuff. But without any further ado, I'm going to turn the camera around, and before I show off card number 41, I also like to show off some other cards in my collection, some stuff that either pertains to that player or year, but in this case it's just going to be some other cards that I have in my vintage baseball card collection. So I'm going to show those off and then get to card number 41 on my 100 cards for a $10,000 list. So let's go check out some cool vintage cards. Okay, before I get to card number 41, I pulled some 1979 Topps cards from my collection. Some of the ones that are in higher grade, I have about a dozen of them here, so I'm going to go through them fairly quickly here. The first one is, these are all going to be PSA 9 copies. The Steve Carlton, then the Tom Seaver, nice action shot there. Then we have this really cool looking Dwight Evans. I have the Johnny Bench in a PSA 9. Some of these 79s are really hard to find centered. A lot of them have sort of like a diamond centering to them. Now the next one here, the next two actually, they're not cards of Hall of Famers, or it's not a card of a Hall of Famer, but this particular card is basically responsible for me getting into collecting baseball cards. I've told the story before, I'm not going to get into it again, but it is the Bump Wills, the Corrected Rangers, and the Error Blue Jays. This was the card that I had, the corrected version, which back in 1980 or 81 was worth like $7, and to a maybe a 10-year-old was just amazing that I had this corrected version, which is harder to find than the error version. So of course I had to go out and buy high-end copies of this Bump Wills card, both versions, just because of sentimental value and what this card means to me, and which started my lifelong journey into collecting baseball cards. Next we have this Raleigh Fingers. Then we have the Tony Perez. Next we have the Fergie Jenkins. The Mike Schmidt in a PSA 9. Then the Yankees team card with Bob Lemon. And finally, Jim Catfish Hunter. All right, now for the big reveal. I mentioned that I've always thought that this card was so beautiful that I just there's something about the card. It's not necessarily the player, not necessarily the set. There's just something about this card that speaks to me, as it always has. And it's a Nolan Ryan card, and I consider it probably his nicest looking card. Would love to know your opinion in the comments. If you agree with me, or think there's another Nolan Ryan card that you think is better looking overall than this one. And it's his 1972 Topps card. there's again, I can't explain it. There's just something about this card. I mean, he's in an Angels uniform. It's his first year shown with the Angels. I mean, his hat is airbrushed, because I wouldn't be surprised if that is actually a Mets uniform there. So it's not an action shot. It's probably this close-up portrait because they didn't have a picture of him in an Angels uniform. But to me, that doesn't take away from the card. And just look at the centering, the sharpness of the card. I mean, and look at the corners there. I mean, just look at them. It is, oh man, I've again been looking for this card obviously since I put my 100 card list together, but more intently a little bit before the National. I did have some non-national hobby dollars sort of saved up, so I thought I would try to go for this card. This is on the more expensive side of cards on my 100 card list, and all the ones I was looking for just didn't have. Some of these 72s are hard to find well centered, and a lot of the Nolan Ryans that I saw just didn't have the right centering, just didn't have the right eye appeal. And for this particular Nolan Ryan card, I wanted a card that had really nice eye appeal. So I haven't shown the back yet. The back's really nice as well. And so with this look here, and after me talking up the card, obviously I've hidden the number grade assigned to it, but would love to know what your guesses are in the comments as to what grade this is. All right, you have your guesses. Well, it's not one of my famous PSA 4s. It's a PSA 5. And while I'm trying to get away from pointing out different issues with cards, I really want to try to, in my videos, just show off the beauty of the card and not focus on any of the negatives. But occasionally I see in the comments of, well, I can't believe, how did that get a certain grade or whatever. So just to let those of you know, if you're questioning why, and this is, I believe, a newer slab, so this isn't an older slab where, okay, it got a 5, but it may have been over or undergraded or whatever. The reason why I think this card probably got the grade it did, I'm not sure if it's gonna show up here, but in this corner, I don't know if you can see, there's a slight, yeah, you can see it right that there's just a very slight indent in that corner, and there you can see it right there. There's a little bit more prevalent. There's just like a little bend or a little indent. And there's a little bit on the edge there. There's like a little. I mean, it's so small. A little indent there on the edge. I think it's. See, I'm even having a hard time finding it. I think it's like right there. I mean, you can't even see. So that's the worst corner, and you can't even see it on the back. So it doesn't even go through the card. And if that's the only thing that's wrong with this card, again, I can't even get the words out right in terms of what I feel about this card. I think it's his, quite honestly, I think it's his nicest looking card. It's not an action shot. He has some great action shot cards, don't get me wrong. Just the overall look of the card, the 71 design, the close-up portrait I actually like. You can just see the intensity in his face there. I mean, he was a mean competitor. I mean, you just ask Robin Ventura. Anyway, so I'm going to put this down here. I'm actually going to get into the numbers because I think it's important for me to tell you about why I decided to spend the money that I did for this card, and there's a little bit of a backstory to it. So I actually had this card on my 100 card list in a PSA 5, and when I put the list together last November, so we're almost approaching a year now, but last November, I thought if I got a decent deal that for a PSA 5 I'd have to spend $100. Well, as I mentioned, I spent 60% more than I thought I would have to spend. So to do the easy math for you, all in, I was in for $160 when I thought I would have to spend $100. So let me take you through my thought process here. My initial thought in going after this card was, hey, I don't need a PSA 5. Let me see if I can find a PSA 4 copy. Well, that was somewhat of a struggle. Again, when you get to the PSA 4s, it's a little bit harder to find a well-centered copy. You get a little bit more issues with the card than you would with a PSA 5, sort of makes sense. And about the time that I was really making an effort to try to pick up this card, it was around the end of June. And a PSA 4 copy came up, I believe, for auction. And I think at that particular time, I didn't have a whole lot of money to put toward this card at that time. I may have had $100 or so. And I noticed what previous cards were selling for a PSA 4 and the eye appeal, and that PSA 4 had really nice eye appeal. It was one that I was really considering going after, but I knew I only had about $100. And so I was like, hey, if a PSA 5, I thought I'd have to spend $100, am I really going to have to spend $100 for a PSA 4 copy? Boy, I must have been really off on my estimation. Well, that auction ended with the card selling for $145 for PSA 4, $145. And I was like, wow, there really is a centering tax on these Nolan Ryan cards. So I had to rethink my whole thought process in picking up this card. I knew $100 was not going to cut it. And actually, that $145 was a bit of an outlier. It was the highest sale in some time, for some time for that card. Currently, the average price for a PSA 4 is $72. And I took a look at some of the last sales of PSA 4s, and yeah, none of them would have met my eye appeal standard. So I started looking at PSA 5s, and actually this card, this actual card, I'm almost positive, I was looking through X, formerly Twitter, and someone had posted an eBay listing saying, hey, I don't know if it was a friend of his or just someone that came across this listing, but they said, wow, check out this 72 Topps Nolan Ryan on auction on eBay. I noticed it was a PSA 5. As soon as I saw the picture of it, I said, this is the one I want to go after. So again, it was an auction, and I knew that the last time I seriously looked at the 72 Nolan Ryan, a 4 went for $145. So knowing the centering on this one, I knew it was, I'm like, was probably got to go for at least $145, if not more, because this is a PSA 5. So it was an auction, and luckily at the time I had a decent amount of money saved up. Now this is after the National now. So I was trying to save up a little bit of money to try to go after maybe one of the more expensive cards on the list. And went up for auction, and I bid strong on it. I forget what my actual bid was. I think it may have been $160, $175, something like that. I bid what basically I had available at the time to spend on cards. And I won it for $145 and change. But then, of course, you have Pennsylvania tax at 6% and shipping. All in, I'm in at $160. So how does this compare to other PSA 5 copies? Well, on the low end, PSA 5s are selling for $78. Again, those are ones that are not as well centered as this one is here. On average, $120, and the recent high sale for PSA 5 was $210. So the $145 that I won the auction for is not too much higher than the current average for PSA 5. So when it comes to the card itself, I think I got a good deal. When it came to the card and how much I spent versus what was on my 100 card list, I was way over budget. But as you can see here, I don't know. If you were in my situation, here's another question I would love to know in the comments. If you were in my situation, knowing that I thought I'd only have to spend $100 for a 72 Nolan Ryan with really nice eye appeal, would you have spent $160 all in to pick up this card? I would imagine that most of you would, but again, would love to know in the comments. So I'm still doing good overall. So with the 41 cards now that I've picked up off of my list, I thought I would have to spend a total of $3,790. So what I've spent so far, it took away some of the savings that I've sort of built up over time, but all in, I've spent $2,035 on those 41 cards. So I'm still $1,755 to the good versus what I thought I would have to spend. So saving money on 40 cards, overspending on one card, I think overall is still pretty good. So yeah, there you have it. My latest acquisition, the 71 Topps Nolan Ryan. Oh, I can't put it down. I can't stop looking at it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Would love to know what you think about this 72 Topps Nolan Ryan and some of the 79 Topps cards I showed off in my collection. And with that, that's all I have for you. So until next time, thanks for watching.